Good evening. I'm your host for Kenya News Update today. We begin with a major geopolitical development that could reshape the Middle East and signal a profound shift in American foreign policy. The United States is reportedly considering a complete withdrawal of its troops from Syria. This isn't just about pulling a few hundred soldiers from a desert outpost. This is about the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that began over a decade ago with the war against ISIS. Tonight, we dive deep into what this means for Syria, for America's global standing, and for the new world order emerging under President Donald Trump's second term. We'll examine the strategic vacuum it creates, the reactions from global powers, and the complex web of alliances and animosities that will now be forced to reconfigure. We'll also look at the parallel signals coming from Washington's approach to Africa, where a recent diplomatic controversy reveals a similar theme of retrenchment and transactional relationships. This is a story about American power, its limits, and its future direction. Let's get into it. The American military footprint in Syria has been a point of contention since its inception. Initially deployed under President Obama to combat the Islamic State, the mission evolved and expanded. Under President Trump's first term, there were abrupt announcements of withdrawal, followed by partial reversals and a commitment to secure the oil. The current force, estimated at around 900 troops, is primarily stationed in the northeast, working alongside the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF. Their stated mission has been to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS and to serve as a counterweight to Iranian influence and the regime of Bashar al-Assad. But this presence has always been legally and politically precarious, lacking a formal invitation from the Syrian government and operating under post-9/11 congressional authorizations that many argue are stretched beyond recognition. The consideration of a full withdrawal, therefore, taps into a long-running debate about the purpose and sustainability of America's endless wars. Proponents of withdrawal argue it's a long overdue correction. They point to the staggering cost, not just in dollars, but in American lives and strategic focus. They argue that the primary mission of defeating ISIS's territorial caliphate has been accomplished, and that remaining tasks of counter-terrorism and stabilization can be handled through over-the-horizon capabilities, like drones and special forces raids from neighboring countries. They see the presence as an unnecessary entanglement, a tripwire that could drag the U.S. into a direct conflict with Russia or Iran. For this camp, withdrawal is a fulfillment of a promise to end forever wars and refocus on priorities at home and challenges elsewhere, particularly in the Indo-Pacific with China. This view finds a powerful voice in the current White House. President Trump, now in his second term, has consistently voiced skepticism of nation-building and costly foreign military adventures. A withdrawal from Syria would be a definitive stamp on his foreign policy legacy, a move away from what his supporters might call the imperial overreach of previous administrations. But the critics of withdrawal paint a starkly different picture. They warn of catastrophic consequences. First and foremost, they argue it would abandon America's Kurdish allies, the SDF, who bore the brunt of the ground fighting against ISIS, and lost an estimated 11,000 fighters. Without the deterrence of U.S. troops, these critics fear a repeat of 2019, when a previous Trump-ordered pullback allowed Turkish forces to invade northern Syria, displacing hundreds of thousands and creating a security vacuum. A full withdrawal could greenlight a much larger Turkish incursion aimed at crushing Kurdish autonomy ambitions. Secondly, they argue it would hand a strategic victory to America's adversaries. It would cement the control of the Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, over the entirety of Syria. Russia's airbase in Latakia and Iran's network of militias would face one less obstacle. This, analysts warn, would give Iran a contiguous land bridge from Tehran to the Mediterranean, strengthening its ability to supply proxies like Hezbollah and posing a greater threat to Israel. Israel has conducted hundreds of airstrikes in Syria to disrupt this very buildup. A U.S. exit would leave Israel to confront this entrenched Iranian presence largely alone. The regional reaction would be one of deep anxiety among American partners and undisguised triumph in Moscow and Tehran. This debate is not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a broader pattern of American foreign policy recalibration. To understand this, we need to look beyond the Middle East. Recently, a leaked email from the new head of the U.S. State Department's Bureau of African Affairs caused an uproar. The email, sent this January, instructed diplomats to unabashedly and aggressively remind African governments of the generosity of the American people, despite recent cuts to aid. The tone was widely criticized as patronizing and out of touch, dismissing Africa as a strategic priority while demanding gratitude. This incident, though diplomatic, echoes the same transactional, America First logic that underpins the Syria withdrawal consideration. It suggests a foreign policy less interested in building long-term partnerships or upholding a liberal international order, and more focused on immediate, tangible returns and a narrative of self-reliance. This shift is what some commentators are calling the ugly return of imperialism, but of a different kind, not the imperialism of territorial conquest, but of transactional dominance, where relationships are viewed through a lens of cost-benefit analysis, and client states are expected to align with American interests without the promise of enduring protection or shared values. It's a pullback from the role of global security guarantor, asking partners to do more for themselves while still expecting them to favor American economic and political interests. This creates a paradox. On one hand, the U.S. seems to be reducing its direct military burdens. On the other, as seen with the leaked Africa email, it still expects a degree of deference and alignment. This tension is playing out in real time. And as America contemplates stepping back in one theater, other powers are stepping forward, sometimes in direct confrontation with U.S. allies. Look at the Mediterranean. Just this week, reports emerged that the French Navy, in an operation led by UK intelligence, seized a Russian oil tanker. This wasn't a random interdiction. This vessel was reportedly part of Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet, a network of older tankers used to circumvent Western price caps and sanctions on Russian oil following the invasion of Ukraine. The seizure, in international waters, is a bold and escalatory move. It signifies a Western willingness to enforce sanctions militarily, directly challenging Russian economic warfare. It also highlights how the frontline of geopolitical competition has shifted. While the U.S. mulls an exit from the land war in Syria, its closest allies are engaging in high-stakes naval brinkmanship with Russia in European waters. This action, led by France and the UK, also raises questions about burden sharing. Is this the future? America reduces its footprint in messy ground conflicts, while its European allies take on more direct, hard power responsibilities in their own neighborhood to contain Russia. If so, the Syria withdrawal could be a catalyst for a more empowered, but also more exposed, European foreign policy. The French seizure of the Russian tanker is a signal that the rules-based order America helped build is still being defended, but increasingly by a committee where Washington may no longer be the unquestioned chair. This brings us to the domestic political landscape in the U.S., which is inextricably linked to these foreign policy shifts. The America that is considering leaving Syria is an America deeply divided, focused on internal cultural and political battles. A recent legal case underscores this inward turn. A federal magistrate judge dismissed the Justice Department's attempt to charge former CNN anchor Don Lemon for his involvement in an anti-ICE protest at a Minnesota church years ago. The judge's rejection of the charges, seen by many as politically motivated, highlights the intense polarization around immigration and law enforcement. It's a reminder that the national conversation in Washington is dominated by these domestic fissures. The political energy and capital for sustaining complex military deployments abroad is simply evaporating. The bipartisan consensus that once supported such engagements is gone. For a president like Donald Trump, whose political brand is built on challenging established institutions and prioritizing domestic issues, a decision to withdraw from Syria aligns perfectly with his base's expectations. It is a tangible deliverable. The political cost of any subsequent chaos in Syria would likely be dismissed by his supporters as not America's problem, or blamed on the failures of previous administrations. The calculation, therefore, may be that the domestic political reward for ending a war far outweighs the foreign policy risk. So, what happens next? If the withdrawal proceeds, the immediate aftermath in Syria will be a scramble. The Kurdish-led administration in northeast Syria will face an existential dilemma: seek a deal with the Assad regime and Russia for survival, or try to withstand pressure from Turkey alone. The most likely outcome is a fragmented settlement, with the regime reasserting control over some areas, Turkey consolidating a buffer zone, and a persistent low-level insurgency from ISIS remnants thriving in the chaos. The humanitarian situation, already dire with over 12 million people displaced since the war began, could worsen. Regionally, U.S. allies like Israel and Jordan will have to adjust their security postures, likely leading to more unilateral Israeli strikes in Syria. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who have also been recalibrating their relationships with Assad, may feel compelled to accelerate their normalization efforts, further integrating Syria into the Arab fold, but on terms favorable to Damascus and Moscow. For global order, the message is stark. America's security guarantees are becoming more conditional, more fleeting. This will accelerate trends toward multipolarity and regional hedging. Countries from Kenya to Kazakhstan will be watching closely. They will see that the era of relying on a predictable American security umbrella is fading. This may drive increased defense spending, regional alliances, and more nuanced diplomacy with all major powers, China, Russia, and a more transactional United States. For Africa, the lesson from the State Department leak and the Syria contemplation is clear. Partnership with Washington will be less about shared values or development, and more about explicit, immediate exchanges. This could push nations like Kenya, under President William Ruto, to further diversify their international partnerships, seeking investment and security cooperation from multiple quarters without firm allegiance to any one bloc. In conclusion, the potential U.S. withdrawal from Syria is far more than a tactical military repositioning. It is a symbol. It symbolizes the end of America's post-9/11 military paradigm in the Middle East. It symbolizes the ascendancy of a foreign policy driven by domestic political imperatives and a cost-benefit ledger. And it symbolizes the uncertain transition to a world where other powers are testing the limits, whether it's Russia with its shadow fleet or Iran with its militias. The voids left behind will not stay empty. They will be filled by adversaries, by chaos, or by regional powers stepping into roles they never asked for. The next 12 months will reveal whether this retrenchment makes America stronger and more focused, or whether it simply cedes ground and influence in a world that remains dangerously interconnected. The story of Syria is becoming a story about the future of American power itself. For Kenya News Update Today, this is a critical moment to watch. Subscribe to Kenya News Update Today.